Welcome to Good Screenwriting. I'm Trevor Meyer, and today we're going to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I know I already did a review on this movie, so this is not going to be a review. You can go check that out if you want. What I'm going to talk about now is the layering of subplots and supporting characters in this movie compared to other movies. There are good ways to do subplots and bad ways to do subplots, and for a while, I was of the opinion that every subplot needed to support the main plot, okay? So, any character involved in the story, they could have their own character beats, but it all had to point towards the main through line, the main spine of the story, otherwise it didn't belong. It violated the unity of the piece. I think Guardians of the Galaxy... Now, the thing about that, though, is that I had to reconcile that with the fact that Pulp Fiction is one of my favorite movies. And I always thought, well, that's the exception to the rule. It doesn't really count. Except Sin City is literally structured the exact same way as Pulp Fiction. You open up with a short scene, short story. Then you have the first half of story one. You do an entire second story, an entire third story. You do the second half of story one. And then you wrap up the opening scene with a bookend that ties the whole thing together. It was the best way to do Sin City as a movie because they adapted these little tiny graphic novels. You know, I think there's like 7 Sin City graphic novels, and they they adapted one of them, and you look at it, and it's like, okay, that's about 40 minutes long. That's not enough for a movie. All right, let's take a look at this one and this one. All of a sudden, they have 120 minutes worth of story by adapting 3 graphic novels and a short story and a little tag scene they wrote just for the movie. Okay? So, the tag scene coming at the very end and the short story serving as a prologue, pre-credits to the film, to get you in the Sin City mindset. Now, all the Sin City stories take place in the same universe, and they have characters that cross over, but it's really 3 completely different protagonists, if not 4 protagonists. You have Marv, you have Hartigan, and you have... he's played by Clive Owen. Crap, I forgot his name. Well, I'll get back to that eventually. But... he was the star of A Dame to Kill For, played by Josh Brolin in that movie. I know it starts with a C. Whatever. That's not what this movie. That's not what this video is about. Okay. Pulp Fiction is structured the same way. You got the opening scene, the end scene, and in between you have Mia Wallace overdoses on, I believe it was heroin. She thought it was cocaine, but it wound up being heroin. And John Travolta has to resurrect her. And then you have the Bruce Willis story with Marcellus Wallace, and then you have, the bookends on both ends of those 2 stories, which is part 1 and part 2 of Jules and, God, I cannot think of people's names today. My God, Vincent and Jules, Vincent and Jules. They go to a place, they kill some guys, and then they accidentally shoot their buddy Marvin in the face, and they have to get rid of the body. They split that story in half and put it on the sides of the other 2 stories, okay? So, taking all that into account, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is structured almost the exact same way, except they play it out in a linear timeline, so you can't tell that it's 3 different stories, but it is. It is. I'm willing to bet that Peter Quill's story with his father lasts maybe 40 minutes of this movie. He's got a little bit of setup and then a big, huge climactic battle at the end, but he's off screen for a good chunk of the movie, and I'm guessing about a third of the movie is him, a third of the movie is the Rocket and Yondu and Baby Groot sequence where they all get taken over by the mutiny of the Ravagers, and then you get another little chunk that is Nebula and Gamora and their sisterhood and their rivalry between each other, and you get a little bit of the Sovereign as well, just because You needed something to open the movie. You needed a false villain to detract from ego. Okay, so you have Aisha, who is the head of the Sovereign, and she's meant to look like the main villain so that you don't suspect that ego is the main villain. So they had to throw that in just to give you a curveball at some point. But these stories don't actually connect with each other in any meaningful way. They just happen to take place in the same time frame and in relatively the same space as each other, and that's why they interconnect. So, Yondu's story, for example, his antagonist is not ego. All right, it's a completely different story that's just grafted onto the main story. Okay, the main plot line is Star Lord Peter Quill versus Ego, his father. Yondu, his antagonist is Taserface, the guy who leads the rebellion, the mutiny among the Ravagers. Okay, so you might say, "Oh, wait a second, wait a second." Yondu takes out Taserface in Act 2, and then in the end he fights Ego in Act 3 with Peter Quill. So isn't Ego the main antagonist for Yondu too? No, because that's Peter's story. Don't you see? Yondu had his own storyline that was resolved, and that was the end of his story when he defeated Taserface. And then when he shows up later on in the movie, that's Peter's story. He then becomes a supporting character in Peter's story, the same way that in Pulp Fiction, uh, John Travolta's character Vincent really leads the Mia Wallace story, but he shows up only as a supporting character in the Bruce Willis story so that he can get blown away. All right? And I think Jules is really the protagonist of the diner sequence and all the stuff about getting rid of the body. And I think Vincent, again, is a supporting character in that storyline. But his story's over. The Mia Wallace storyline was his story. Okay? So, what the right way to do this is, in my opinion, is you look at the story content you have, and it might be really good. You might say, okay, we got this Peter Quill story where he meets his father, and he's really excited for a while, but then he finds out his father is actually not such a great guy, and then they turn on each other, and then the movie's over. All right, how much time did that take up? Well, that's going to amount to about 40 minutes of actual screen time. And you're like, well, that's not really enough. What else can we put in this movie? Let's do a Yondu storyline, because spoiler alert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Yondu dies at the end, okay? So they say, we really got to build up his character more before we kill him, otherwise it's not going to have any meaning, okay? So they, they build up his character, and they give him something to do with Rocket, and they even build in a couple of extra side relationships with Drax and Mantis, just to flesh the thing out. You start from the bottom and work your way up. And once the screenplay is quote unquote full, as in you've got 2 hours of material roughly, you're done. You're done. You don't need to add any more to the movie once you reach that point. And if you still have characters, if this is like a sequel and you still have characters hanging around and they have nothing to do, just have them be an ally in one of the other main plots, okay? Baby Groot does not have his own plot. He's a supporting character for Yondu. You don't need to give everyone their own subplot. The wrong way to do it is to say, here's 20 things that we want in this movie, make it fit. We need the Rhino, and we need Harry Osborn, and we need Norman Osborn, and we need Peter to find out the truth about his parents, and we need to have Aunt May work in a hospital to pay her bills, and we need to, I don't know what movie I'm talking about, and we need to kill Gwen Stacy. We need to find a way to kill Gwen Stacy. Oh, and let's throw in that Electro guy, too, and give him a backstory where Peter Parker can't remember his name. Oh, yes, and don't forget to put in the ghost of George Stacy so he can haunt Peter because he broke his promise from the first movie, okay? So take these 20 different plot lines and make them fit into a movie. That's the wrong way to do it, okay? You start from the bottom, start as simple as you can, and build it up from there, okay? Age of Ultron, a lot of people bash Age of Ultron for having too many plot lines. Here's what I will say. I know that Joss Whedon went into that movie and the studio more or less forced him or strongly suggested that he put in references to Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War and progress the storylines, pick up the threads from before, uh, build up everything in the future that's going to come up, set up Black Panther, all that stuff. And I know that Joss Whedon wanted to do Ultron and he wanted to do the love story between Bruce and Natasha. I don't know what else in that movie he wanted to do, but I'm pretty sure Marvel said, well, stick this in there and stick that in there and make sure you make a reference to this. And I will say the strength of Age of Ultron, not that it's better than the first movie and not that that was ideal by any means, but given that list of things that had to happen in Age of Ultron, I think Joss Whedon handled it as gracefully as he could. I think they said, we need these 20 things to happen in this movie. Make it fit. He said, done. All right? He found a way to weave them all together in a way that at least mostly made sense. Okay? So, ideally, though, you would start from the bottom and build up until you hit your 2 hour mark. Don't start with a bunch of stuff and try to fit it in to a 2 hour movie because that never works. It almost never works. It worked with Age of Ultron, but not as well as the first Avengers, okay? Let me know what you think about this, okay? Any other movies you think are overstuffed with subplots, or maybe didn't have enough story material, could have used a little bit more subplots? Leave your comments in the section below. This is Good Screenwriting, and I'm Trevor Meyer. See you next time.